evening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Author Circle, September 17th, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope you're having a wonderful day and make sure you stay tuned. We've got an exciting event happening today. I just want to go over some of the details about who we are with Voice of Men 360. First of all, my name is Joe Groh, and I'm founder of Mastermind Group, host of Author Circle, also peer support coordinator for Voice of Men 360. Voice of Men 360 is a non-profit organization founded in 2020, is based in Toronto, Canada. Voice of Men 360 was born out of seeing a tremendous need and stepping up to providing services to help support and overcome men's and boys' life challenges. We're also part of International Men's Day, and we'll be giving you more details about that as well. International Men's Day has been serving for over 21 years, and so far 90 countries and around the world joined together and doing various activities. We follow 6 pillars, which is the overall well-being of boys and men. We follow in the same footsteps. Why is Author Circle around? We want to recognize and appreciate the individuals who have been contributing in the areas of boys and men's issues through their writings. Participants around the world will be joining and sharing their contributions and experiences. This show runs on the third Saturday every month from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before I introduce our special guest today, we'd like to go through our disclaimer. We'd like to remind you that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered with good faith toward peaceful harmony. The views and opinions expressed in today's episode are those of our speakers, do not represent Voice of Men 360. Our organizations engages in discussion forums to offer inspiration and create awareness to the issues of men who wish to overcome their life challenges. We're not providing medical or therapeutic advice should you require that type of assistance. We recommend you contact a medical professional immediately. If you have questions or concerns about today's episode or any Voice of Men 360 content, please email us info@voiceofmen360.org. And today's guest is John Israel from the Mr. Thank You Project. This is his book here, if I can put it straight. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a founder of Mr. Thank You Project, a global movement to inspire 74 million thank you cards written all over the world. He's an author, speaker, and business owner. He speaks at organizational and business conferences all over the world, teaching people how they can utilize gratitude through a written word to enhance well-being, build community, and grow their bottom line. He's been featured on ABC News, Fox News, Good Morning America, Pop Sugar, and Martha Stewart for his work on gratitude. And I've enjoyed conversing back and forth with John. I found it fascinating how I came across this book. Is a little over a month, or is almost 2 months ago, I bought 5 books in 1 week. The next week, I went to the same bookstore, bought 4 books, and I saw this book, and I thought, never heard of this book. This looks funny. Should I or shouldn't I buy it? And I thought I might as well make it in even 10 books in 2 weeks, as if I'm going to read them all in one day. And I'm very, very excited I bought this book. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I find, as I told John, each page would be worth an hour seminar. There's so much awesome material in this book. I highly recommend it. And him and I have several commonalities that I didn't really say to him, but I'll mention it now, why I feel that if he and I lived closer, we'd probably be best of buddies. He worked for a company called Cutco. The president of the company that I'm distributing products for actually worked for Cutco when he was 17. It's a company out of Florida called Carico, Mr. Richard Capadano. Now that company is in over 100 countries. He also has a wife named Monica. One of my sister's name is Monica. He has a dog. His dog's name is, believe it or not, Joey. And that was my name when I was a little boy. I actually hated being called Joey. I want to be called Joe. But now if you want to call me Joey, I'm okay with that. There's also something common. He talks about a book he read that influenced him called Start With Why. And I'm in the process of reading it. I'm about halfway through. An extremely good book as well. So without further ado, here is Mr. John Israel. And you and your audience, I want everybody to fasten your seatbelt. This is definitely going to be an awesome time here that we're going to have.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. So fill us, the audience, in a little bit about why did you start this book and the Thank You Project. Give us a little brief understanding, because it's going to be very brief, and I hope everybody who's watching and listening is going to take notes, because I have 18 pages. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of my notes, but let's get through them. And in a brief manner, why did you start Thank You Project? What's the origin of it?
Yeah, there's a couple different directions I can go with it and how it started, but the most relevant or recent to it was I run a gifting company. So I actually have made a career helping people say thank you. We sell gifts to companies and organizations to give out to their clients and their employees. And so, I'm a gratitude salesman. I built a really thriving business around that, around gratitude. But at the end of the day, business is a business, which means that we have all the same problems that everybody else does, which is finding new clients and running payroll. And I was kind of in charge of finding new clients. And so I was constantly working. And at one point, I was just so overworked and overwhelmed that I just wanted to quit. And it's interesting to quit a company that you start. So there's other people involved. And I came to a headway when I came home one day, and I was complaining to my wife about just everything, right? Like my life and traffic and clients and issues. And we had just had a brand new baby. And she's sitting on the couch, nursing our son. And she looks at me and says, "John, if you can't appreciate what we have now, who's to say you're going to be any happier when you finally get what you say you want?" And that was just one of those statements that for me was very profound, because she was right. Like there were so many things going well in my life. I couldn't even see them because I was so focused on everything that wasn't going well. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I didn't have a name for the problem back then, but I have a name for it now, but it's called perpetual discontentment, which is the never ending feeling that what isn't enough. And so I, had read this book, Start With Why, which was really understanding that people don't care what you say, they care why you're saying it. And if you're in business, people don't care what you sell, they care why you're selling it. So we decided to come out with a mission statement for our business, which was all about elevating gratitude on the planet. And so we had that statement, and I was working with a coach at the time who really challenged me with a quote. And the quote was from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And what he says is, "Excuse me, I cannot hear what you are saying because who you are speaks so loudly." And what's great, Joe, and not great about that quote is that it challenges us to be consistent with our word, right? It challenges us to not just say, "This is what I care about, these are my values," but to live it in our behavior. And I know this conversation, Joe, is related to men. And this is such an important thing for men to feel confident in themselves, that they are consistent with what they say, they follow through on, and they live it out. So the journey of inspiring 74 million thank you cards really started in that painful moment with my wife, realizing how much great I had in my life, but I wasn't acknowledging it, and realizing we had a mission as a business that we weren't living out. And so I thought, how can I do that? How can I find a way to not just be this guy who says gratitude matters, but to live it out? So I started a project where I made a commitment for 1 year to handwrite 5 thank you cards every day for 365 days in a row. And that started me on a journey that has changed my life, my business, my relationships, elevated my joy, and truthfully, Joe, and we may get into this, but it also created a lot of healing that I didn't expect to happen. And so there was so much that came out of it. I just had to keep sharing the story. And then I got picked up on the news, and we wrote a book about it. And then I was asked to give a TED talk. And so it really, I think what we just understood was that this isn't an isolated problem of one individual man who lived in the central coast of California in the US. It was a pervasive experience in our world, that there's so much that is going well around us, but for whatever reason, we have a hard time seeing it.
I just need to jump in to page 13, because I've read my notes several times. I've read your book probably 4 times now. And there is a Mrs. Thank You, from what I understand, because she took a course called the Wisdom Course. And the instructor talked about abundance, said, if you want more abundance in your life, look at what you have abundance of and give it away. And she had purchased over 100 thank you cards. So if I got the story correct, the origin of this actually came from her, was it not?
Yeah, so that's my wife who did that. So my wife was going through we were both going through this program through Landmark Education is the personal development company. And so we were going through that, and there was a course on abundance. And so the prompt was to feel abundant, look at what you have an abundance of, and give it away. Because the underlying belief of abundance is you have more than enough. So feel what it's like to give it away. Then you'll know what it truly means to be abundant. And so my wife had been collecting thank you cards and never sending them out. And so that was that when I say my wife was writing handwritten cards with nursing my infant son, that was the moment. So she was actually in the middle of her own abundance project, writing all these handwritten thank you cards to people. That's what I saw is while she was nursing our infant son, she was also, I may have forgotten this part of the story, she was also handwriting cards to people that had supported her during her pregnancy and during her life. And so that's kind of the connection piece of the two.
Well, I thought I'd bring that up because many times men's progress success comes from the inspiration of a woman that's either standing behind them or in front of them or beside them, inspiring, pushing, pulling them, bugging them, pleading with them, whatever it takes. So I'm probably putting some words in that weren't in there, but I thought I'd mention that. So there should be a Mr. and Mrs. Thank You project.
Right.
But you had some interesting things happen and you overcame them. And so I can identify myself because different healing in my past, the last part of it happened from being thankful from a sermon the pastor of my church gave. And I acknowledged him several times on that because most people think you need to be thankful for wonderful, happy, nice things. Mm-hmm. But how about being thankful for when you get rejected, condemned, judged, complained about, gossiped, hurt, whatever it might be? Nobody wants to be thankful for that. But within the dark clouds, some sunshine and rainbows may come. And you've proven that over and over in your book, because there's been different things that I've read in the book. I love what it says on page 5. Inside every life experience, there's a gift. Your job is to find it. So you also indicated, you said you're successful financially, but broken emotionally. I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit, because what we've had a predominant theme in our interviews, in our whole organization, is helping men that have struggled in every area of their life and providing hope. Rather than saying, you got a problem, too bad, too sad, see you later. Let's see if we can provide hope, because you provide that throughout your whole book when someone reads it. And I find it a joyous adventure reading it, because you provided that journey through there. Right in the title, it says a journey to elevate the level of gratitude on the planet. So you're doing that through being grateful. And some people go, how can you get miracles by being grateful? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. Well, so what's beautiful. So I'll go a step further and give a definition of the word gratitude. So this comes from Dr. Robert Emmons. He's the foremost researcher on gratitude. He works for UC Davis in California. And so what he says is gratitude is the emotion one feels when you receive a gift or experience something as a gift. So let's break that down, right? So to receive something as a gift, right? When someone gives you a gift unexpectedly that you didn't do anything for, you didn't ask for, how do you feel? You feel some level of gratitude, some appreciation, like, oh my gosh, like I did nothing to deserve this. Like what a joyous thing, right? That's gratitude. But the other part of that definition is it's the emotion one feels when you receive a gift or experience something as a gift. So what that means is it is the perspective you take on something. And so an example that I share, and I know there's going to be different ages of men who are listening to this, but if you've ever been in a relationship, right? Like I remember the first time I dated I had a girlfriend, I was 12 years old, right? To whatever type of a girlfriend you can have at the age of 12, right? And we went to the mall and we held hands. Like that's what it looked like. But I'll never forget the day that she called me to break up with me. She didn't even break up with me. She had her friend call me and break up with me on her behalf, which was terrible, right? Like I remember going home and like taking the coldest shower of my life. And to make it worse, I find out she called my best friend and asked him on a date. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the worst human being on planet Earth. And not only that, like, I can't, how do you trust somebody, right? And any of us who've had a breakup of some kind, it may not have been that severe or that to that capacity. You know what that emotion is, it feels like. So to, to, to feel gratitude in that moment is virtually impossible. But here's the interesting thing. With time and perspective, I can look back on that experience and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that happened." Because that occurred, you know, I was challenged to grow. I was also, because that happened, I met my wife, you know, a decade later, and I love my wife, and we have 4 children. I'm so grateful that that relationship ended because I found something so much better. So then the whole idea is, how long does it take someone to feel gratitude from a painful experience? And the answer is, as long as it takes you to find the gift. That is such a magical perspective to understand, because in any given moment, if you, and that was part of the project, Joe, and I'm sure you saw this when you read the book, is that some of this year-long project wasn't just, oh, let me just find all the things that are great in my life. No, it was looking at, hey, what are the dark parts of my life? What are the moments that I failed? You know, there was an example in the book where I talked about a failed business, right? And you know, it feels terrible to fail, but when you've poured money and years of your life into a business and then it fails, I mean, it doesn't just not feel good. It's demoralizing. It challenges like your confidence as a man. And so I remember that experience. And so during the Mr. Thank You project, I decided to look at like, well, hey, well, yes, I wasn't happy with the failure. Was it 100% a failure? No. Was there anything good that came out of it? Yeah. I mean, we have some very significant relationships. I mean, the godmother and godfather of our first child came from that business. They were initial sales reps that worked for me at the time that became managers and leaders, and we stayed in touch after I closed the business, and we were very close, and they're still friends to this day. And so I spent part of the project sending thank you cards to all the people who actually supported that business while we didn't succeed. And by the way, it wasn't like an utter failure, like we didn't go significantly into debt. It just wasn't as successful as I wanted it to be. So by sending all of these letters to people who were a part of that journey, it started to kind of like dismantle the armor that I had put around myself that I'm a failure, and to start to look at, well, hey, it's not all bad. There are some beautiful, good things that came out of that. On top part of that business, you know, I was speaking and training and running interviews for, you know, hours and hours. That experience trained me so well to do a lot of the public speaking that I do right now. And so to say that it was a failure is short-sighted. And to the degree we look at something only from the lens of what's wrong with it, we will never be able to experience gratitude. So for me, what happened, Joe, is I found all these different areas of my life, and I started tracking, like, what are the painful moments? What are the shameful memories? And what are ways that I can create resolution and find the gift in these experiences? And when I was able to find that gift, Joe, I was able to feel, we create, there's this concept we talk about called emotional resilience, which is how we metabolize pain into progress. And the way that we do that is we look at something from the lens of appreciation and ask ourselves, where is the gift in this experience? And even if we can't see it immediately, we just have to be able to trust that something good will come from this. And that changed a lot of things for me.
Question I had, you didn't have this perception when you were 12 years old, did you?
Definitely not.
So did you obtain this wisdom on your own, or was it through the coach that you had enlisted their services of?
Well, you know, so just to kind of to put a few things together here, I think that where I think probably my first experience, and I believe I talk about this in the book, but my first experience of true, like, deep levels of gratitude occurred when I was about 23. And the reason that happened was, I grew up and we didn't have a lot of money and life was very challenging and I struggled a lot. And for me, my dad traveled a lot for his career. And so I hardly saw him. So I loved him and I wanted his approval and I wanted his time. And so I really tried to achieve that through accomplishment, right? Through my grades or through what I would do in my sports and athletics. And so it was this never ending pursuit. And when I went off to college, I really wanted to make a better life for myself because we struggled financially. And, and then I remember my parents like calling me and telling me that, hey, we can't support you to go through school anymore because your dad has to retire from work because we found out he was sick. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And so there was a lot of shame of like, I was going to have to leave college because of my family situation. So I had a lot of shame, a lot of anger around my upbringing, feeling like it wasn't fair. Because for me, and I think about it totally differently now, but my parents I'm the youngest of 5 children. My parents sent all 5 of us through private Catholic education, not because they had the money for it, but because they valued education so highly. But the problem with that is I was always the poorest kid in the richest school. So my friends were getting like BMWs for their birthdays, and I'm like borrowing my mom's like piece of crap car to like drive a girl to a dance because, that's what we could afford. Right. And so for me, it wasn't until I was 23 and I had made my first 6 figures in a year, which, in the States, like that's a good amount of money. It's more than my dad ever made. And I was 23 and I still wasn't fulfilled. And there was this weird moment. I went through this personal development program through Landmark. That's where Landmark first came into my life. And that's where I heard that quote is that in every life experience, there is a gift and your job is to find it. And it was at that seminar that for the first time in my life, I really, truly felt the gratitude for all of the hardship I had gone through in my life, because that hardship is the only access I had to learning what I was capable of. I learned how to be financially independent when I was like 19 or 20 years old. I learned how to save up money. I learned how to get a good credit score. I learned how to build sales skills because I got a job in sales and I paid for college on my own. And I made a significant amount of money by 23 because of my challenging upbringing. And so I think that for me, like I remember, and this was actually the thank you project before the thank you project, which was I had this crazy moment of gratitude after that seminar I went through, that I went to my computer and I was just sending email after email to, like, I called my family and I thanked them for loving me and doing their best to take care of me. Because honestly had a lot of resentment to my parents. I'm like, you guys, it's your fault we had a bad financial situation. Like, you didn't have to send us to private school. Like, you guys were irresponsible. I literally felt that anger towards my family. But then I realized, man, that them going through that is what allowed me to discover what was available inside of me that I couldn't tap into. So I thank my family. I called my mom, my dad, I called my siblings. I sent emails to every coach, every teacher, every person that had poured into my life. And after every email, it was like this level of gratitude was growing bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm not even kidding, Joe. There was this crazy moment where I felt like I was floating. It was like a high of gratitude. And I remember telling myself, this is back when I was 23. So this is like 17 years ago. And I remember telling myself, I've never felt this good in my life. And if I could find a way to live like this every day, I can die happy. And not only do I want this for myself, I want every person on planet Earth to feel what I'm feeling right now. And so I think that back at 23, Joe, was truly like the catalyst, like the seed that was planted of like, is it really possible to live every day from a grateful heart? Because it's easy to say that. It's easy to get a journal and write down what you're grateful for. But then life throws something in your face, or you have a major failure or a problem or a challenge or a breakdown in a relationship. And then there's the reality of you got to deal with it. And so I think that was somewhat of the origins and really where a lot of that kind of this idea of finding the gift in the experience really kind of connected to the ultimate project that we wound up launching.
Well, you definitely went in a lot of detail, and I'm impressed how you I've said this many times, so it flows well. I don't have to ask a lot of questions, but then our time is limited here, and I'm only on page 9. So there's one part I wanted you to bring up, and from what I can tell, you've overcome it. I don't know if we have enough time, because in 5 minutes, I do want to have a little break and give a little more information about who we are.
Sure.
So do you think you can get into the part I'm talking about, what happened to you when you were 13, or should we wait on a few more minutes?
Yeah. Well, happy to go into it. So to what capacity do you want me to share about that?
Go for the next 5 minutes. If we need more time, we'll continue on it when we come back after a little break with some more announcements.
Yeah. So me at 13, I was sexually molested by a friend, and it was something I carried for a lot of time with shame. And one of the things that came out of this project was a meditation teacher I was working with at the time. And I was sharing with him how all these powerful things that were occurring. And he said, "Hey, John, can you, he's like, have you written any letters to yourself?" And I said, "No." He says, "I would encourage you to do that. And don't just write letters to acknowledge and appreciate yourself, but write letters to parts of you that you are ashamed of or that you have guilt. And then after you write those letters, put a chair across from yourself and read that letter to yourself from today's wisdom, and then sit in the other chair and experience it as though you were that age of a person who went through what they just went through."
Do you remember what you said? Because I remember the page. When I read that part, I almost fainted, because I wasn't expecting that in this book.
Oh, no. Most people, I actually really questioned whether I wanted to put it, because I think for some people it goes pretty deep, but I don't remember the exact words in there, but the essence of that letter was, because clearly when that happened, I didn't tell anybody, and I was very ashamed of it. And so when I wrote that letter to myself, I wrote it from a place of wisdom, from a place of, because when it happened, I felt so worried about what it might mean, right? Because this happened. Does that mean I'm gay? I go to an all boys Catholic high school. Like, what does that mean for me in my life? So I even avoided girls for like years of my life, because I was just so confused and distraught. And so obviously now, years later, I'm married, I'm successful, I have a family, and so I just wrote the letter to that version from the space of what I know of, like, hey, here's what actually happens in your life. Like, I know you're afraid of certain things, but here's the reality. And being able to speak that wisdom into my life at a moment where I so wished somebody would have done that, but no one could, because I wasn't willing to be open about what really had happened. And after reading that letter to myself, I mean, Joe, it was insane. I had this crazy feeling, like my body was got hot, like I was sweating after reading the letter to myself. And there's and then not much happened after that. But what was interesting was, a couple months later, I happened to be at an event, and there was a woman there who was expressing about how she had this sexual trauma from a previous relationship she was in, where ultimately she was sexually assaulted by her boyfriend, who she was in a relationship with. And she was talking about how hard it was affecting her marriage right now, being intimate with her husband. And so I shared with her what I had gone through, and how I had written this letter to myself, and how I'd forgiven myself and forgiven the other boy at the time for what he had done, and how it had created a lot of space and some peace. Now, Joe, I don't normally, up to that point in my life, I wasn't openly sharing that. Like, my wife knew about it at that point. Like, I was pretty open with her, but just being able to share that with her, I could see how much that positively impacted her. And so when I bring this up, because when we go back to the experience of gratitude is the emotion one feels when you receive a gift or experience something as a gift, I, for the first time, probably, Joe, can say that I'm grateful that occurred, for the sake that I could help somebody who is going through something similar. And for some people, that is the only gift you will get out of the pain or trauma you went through, is not that something good, like you didn't make more money because of it, but because you overcame it and you shared how you did that, can change somebody's trajectory in life. And so I think that was really remarkable and totally unexpected out of the whole experience.
Well, what really impressed me is how you created the letter. The words are fantastic, and I thought it was incredibly brilliant that you wrote a letter from your older self to your younger self, and your younger self to your future self. I thought it was incredibly brilliant. I never heard this before. We have several people involved in our organization that are championing helping other people. They've overcome trauma of every kind. So I think this is incredibly powerful. So if we read out what the letter says, they won't need to buy your book. So maybe but it's a powerful letter. It's hard to read. It's very tiny on here, but this is one of the best things in the book. Your notes to yourself on page 86. When I read this, I wasn't expecting this. I thought this is very therapeutic, very powerful, very powerful. So you got this idea on your own?
Well, the part of writing letters to myself came from my meditation teacher I was working with at the time, and so that was the whole thing. And partially, by the way, what had triggered it was I wanted this meditation retreat, and part of the retreat, it was a 2-day silent retreat. I think I talked about this in the book, and it was on Zion National Forest in Utah, out in the States, and I was alone for basically 2 days and silent for 2 days. And we had to contemplate one question, which is, why am I here? In total silence for 2 days. And it was a little frustrating because we were like getting to literally like hour 47, like 2 days was almost over.
Wow.
And I hadn't really heard anything. And then I had this subtle, very faint voice that came on in my head that said, heal yourself, heal the world. Super clear. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. And I shared this with the meditation teacher, and I also shared with him about the project and what I was doing. And that's where he really came up with like, well, hey, so there's a real process here of being able to bring some healing to yourself through letter writing. What if you tried this? And so that's kind of where the idea triggered from, and was one of the most profound things of the entire experience.
Well, with that, I'm just going to have a quick break to give a little more information about who we are. And so let me just proceed with that. So just to tell you a little bit more about who we are, Voice of Men 360 is a nonprofit organization. We do what we can to improve gender relations, uplift the disadvantaged, provide life skills, empower men and boys. We also host a monthly talk show called The Unspoken Tears. And we have also Open Up show that's on Sundays from 10 a.m. to 12. Participants from different industries will join and share their life journeys. And we've got some exciting ones coming up. But I want to give a little bit more information if we can get the poster up for International Men's Day that's coming up. We've got November. It starts November 13th and 19th. So it's going to be virtual this year. This is our third observance of it globally. So I highly recommend, if one in the audience would like to participate or know someone that would be a great contributor as a speaker or guest, let us know. It's going to be an exciting time coming up, not very long from now, November 13th and 19th. So we've got some great activities planned, some good shows. We're going to end up with a comedy show near the end. I'll be hosting that. And we're going to have other guests that have been on our show previously. Maybe we can talk John Israel coming back and having a few words of wisdom, because he definitely has lots of wisdom that he can share more with people. And we also have a live Tamil show on Sundays, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, monthly webinar for Saturday every month, 10:30 Eastern Time. We've got the Unspoken Truths I mentioned, Author Circle every Saturday. We've got podcast. We have monthly men's group meeting, only men for men, every 2 weeks on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30 through Zoom. And we have a great peer-to-peer support group for Indigenous called Pass the Talking Stick, fourth Friday of every month from 6 to 7. And there's no limitation with gender, age, nationally, ethnic groups. All walks of life can participate in any of our shows. And if you want to be a guest on any of our shows, contact us. Phone number is 437-889-8329 or info@voiceofmen360.org. Our website is voiceofmen360.org. You can find us on Facebook, other social media platforms such as Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of our previous Author Circle interviews are on there as well, and love to hear from you. So let's return to our interview with Mr. Thank You, John Israel. Hello again.
All right.
So there's lots more we can talk about, but let's get to the rest of things. I love what you talked about, the emotional intelligence and gratitude. If your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, you're not able to manage your distressing emotions. So it's one thing having a gratitude journal. It's another thing in dealing with severe trauma, whether it's a death, whether it's a breakup, whether it's being fired from your job, whether it's your business going bankrupt or under. How do you overcome those things? Gratitude sure helps, saying thank you, and then you move on, you go, and you're still stressed out. So I love your high level of intelligence and high level of resilience. I love those words. I never heard that before. Emotional resilience and perpetual discontentment, both are opposite, but you've got some great words because you just didn't go casually through your situations. You put your whole heart, mind, body, and soul into it to achieve what you've achieved. And I respect that. And so you also called hyper emotional awareness. Being focused on gratitude as a daily practice has made me hyper aware of my emotional state. So I like what you said there, hyper emotional awareness. And you also brought up, can we sit down in a negative or upset state and write down thank you cards? Technically, yes, but we want the cards to be meaningful. So I love what you said on page 69, solution for a stressful day. Rather than me just reading what's in the book, it's nice when the author describes what you did there.
Yeah, that was so the moment I'll set a little bit of the stage. So we had moved to Dallas, Texas recently at the time, and to where we live now. And I was coming home from like a really rough day, and I was out seeing clients, but things just didn't go well. Bad news, bad news. And so I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go home early and I'll just work on my thank you cards, right? Because I have to write 5 every day for a year. Now, something for the audience to know, if we didn't say it yet, there was a consequence. So I had to write 5 cards every day, or I would have to donate $1,000 to charity. So that was the accountability. So I think it's important to note because sometimes you don't feel like it. And I think one of the key things of being a man is to follow through on your word, right? Joe, you and I were talking about this before we started recording today. And so for me, the accountability came with like, I got to do this no matter how I feel. I need to find a way to get into a grateful state, even when I don't feel like it, right? And it's just like, hey, if you're committed to going to the gym, well, what if you don't feel like it? You just might not go one day. Well, what if you had $1,000 at stake? What would you do? You probably follow through. So for me, the crucible of learning comes from following through when you don't feel like it. And how that showed up was one day I had a terrible day and I came home early to try and write my cards. And as I come home early, I put the key in the door. And when I do that, it makes a sound. And then my chihuahua starts to bark. And then as he barks, I open the door and I see one of my children, the 2-year-old at the time, wake up and start screaming because he had just fallen asleep for a nap. So my dog woke him up. So then he starts screaming. Then my wife, who's holding our other child who had just fallen asleep, he's about a month old, he starts screaming. So I've got a barking dog, two screaming children, and my wife looking at me with laser beams coming out of her head because she's trying to burn a hole through my skull. Like, why are you home early? Right? Because I didn't tell her. And so now I'm like, oh my gosh. All right, I'm going to go upstairs and write some thank you cards, right? Like that's the last thing I wanted to do. And so, Joe, I got up there, I went to my office and I pull out some stationery and I sit down and I knew I was going to write some cards to. And Joe, I couldn't do it. I could not force myself to feel grateful. And I did the only thing I could do, which was I closed the door. I turned off the lights. I laid on the ground and I processed the day. And the visual I like to give people about this moment is when we're in a highly peak emotional state, it's like a snow globe that you shake up and there's like the little snow is like thoughts flying through your head. And it's so hard to see that you can't take any positive steps forward. And that's kind of what it felt like. So by settling down and calming the mind. And I think that's what this year was. It was because I had to be intentionally grateful. I was hyper aware of how do I feel right now? How do I feel right now? How do I feel right now? And if I couldn't access gratitude, I had to create tools to allow myself to get there. And one of them for me, like I said, there was a meditation practice. So by laying on the ground, closing my eyes and processing the day, it was like all that snow just started to get to settle to the bottom. And after about 10 minutes, I get up, I grab my journal, I write down some of my thoughts, I write down some of my fears, I write down what I wanted to happen, how I wanted to feel. And then I started writing my thank you cards and it was fine. It was just, I needed to allow myself to process and feel the negative emotions so that I can move through them. Something that people don't realize is that when we feel something, we think it's real. Right. So in that moment, what I was feeling, Joe, was my feeling was my wife hates me. Like my wife wants a divorce right now. She is so mad at me. And so because of that, I felt emotional stress. I felt anger. I felt shame. I felt whatever I felt. But the thing to know with emotions is that we're using only a certain part of our brain, right? Which is more of like the survival mechanisms, which is fight or flight, right? And so because I was in that state, like that's natural. That is a reaction. But when we actually allow ourselves, like this is part of like human development. This is actually when you talk about like there really is some true intelligence here, meaning that like our brain processes things emotionally towards our brainstem, right? And we make reason of them in our frontal lobes, our frontal cortex. It takes time for information to pass from the brainstem to your frontal cortex. So what happens is most of us never get there. We just simply start reacting based on how we feel. But if we can extend the period of our reaction from the emotion we feel, we actually give our brain time to process what occurred. So meditation and silence was for me that processing time so that the emotions could settle. And then I learned a journaling process, which I don't mind sharing with everybody here. It's something that I call the history method, right? The history method is where you write down what happened exactly as it happened, as if it were written in a history book, right? So for example, like if you read a history book that said, Hitler was a German leader who was a complete jerk and hated Jews and was a completely terrible person. Now, some of those things I think a lot of us could agree with, but that's not really factual. That is emotional. That is how you feel about something. What you could say is Hitler was a man who disagreed with certain things, and so he rose to power and he felt this was the right decision, so he killed all the Jews. Like that would be factually correct. So for me in the moment, I was able to say, what happened? I came home early. I woke up the dogs. The children woke up. My wife is upset. Okay. When you break it down to the facts, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, of course she's upset. Does that mean she's going to hate me forever? No. And then you write down the next thing, which is, what do I know to be true? What I know to be true is that my wife loves me. What I know to be true is that we're going to get over this. And so it's like, okay, so how do you want to feel? I want to feel grateful. Okay. So what do you need to do that? So like I went down and actually apologized to my wife and said, hey, so sorry I woke you up. I'm just going to finish my cards and I'll be ready for dinner. And then I went into writing my cards and I felt great. I could harness the gratitude and it was not as accessible to me before doing the processing. So I think there is something to being able to process our emotions that is so powerful that most men especially don't do, because for a lot of us, we're taught to hold back our feelings, to hold back our emotions. But really, I would encourage you to learn how to look at them intelligently, that understanding that your emotions are there for a reason to guide you, but just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true. And so if you can find your own process to move through those, you can actually be more effective and more present with what you're doing. So that was kind of the process of how it worked out for me.
Well, on page 85, you have some questions that elaborate more in that, but for the sake of time, we're dwindling. I can see this could end up being a 5-hour interview with everything we could be discussing. You've got no shortage of ideas and inspiration. And ideas from where you've assisted and where you've grown through this. So you had written on page 85 about reflection. What disempowering stories from your past are still affecting you? What are the gifts in their experience? Who was involved? Who helped you through it? There's different things you could be asking yourself when you're stressed like that. The key is just getting aware of it and remembering. And you talked about the gratitude triangle. We can elaborate that a little more. But what I'd love to have you talk about for the remaining few minutes is some of the stories. You have quite a few different stories where you have made a massive difference in people's lives by sending out thank you cards, from the pilots to the girl at Starbucks to the waitress that gave you an incredible bear hug. And I love the story of the envelope that was passed around in the plane. So tell us a little bit about that. Try to make it short because we got very little time left. Give us a few of those stories. We want people, of course, to purchase the book for some of the impact, because this book is worth reading 6-7 times. And there's some great, powerful ideas and inspiration in the book. But elaborate a little bit on that, because there's no way I'm going to get through all my notes. I have got lots here, and it would probably need to be a trip to Dallas to go through more, or for you to come here. But I can just tell there's more similarities between you and I than I even found out until now. We could be best buddies for the rest of our lives. I can just see that. So elaborate a little more on those situations where you've impacted people because of the thank you cards. What has happened?
Yeah, I'll do the I'll share the pilot story. So, so one of the things that I do in my business is I would travel a lot, and I would go speak at conferences and drum up business and meet new clients. And I was flying and so I had made a habit of writing thank you cards to the pilots and the flight attendants of my flights. And it was really cool because if I gave them the letter before I got off the plane, then I got to actually see their reaction, and they would come back. It's crazy. When I fly with people, I will always like to write a letter, and I'll have the person next to me sign it, and I'll give it to the flight attendant while we're in the air. And it is amazing to see when they come back. They're like, oh my gosh, like we've never gotten a letter like this. Like, here, do you want some drinks? Do you want some food? Like, we're not supposed to give this stuff out, but to see the impact of just simply saying thank you to people for doing their job well and acknowledging, what goes into their life and the challenges they overcome to do their job well. It's really, really powerful. But this one particular day, I'm boarding the flight, and I realized, man, I've been doing this for a while. It's about 6 months into the project. I've written over 1,000 thank you cards. I've learned a lot, but the challenge is it's all about me. Like, I'm the one who gets the feedback. No one else is getting to participate in this. And so I thought, I wonder if I could pull this off with an entire plane full of people. So I write a very short, I take out 5 cards, because there's 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants on this particular Southwest Airlines flight. And I write a very short note to each of them. And then I put them in the cards in a folder. And in the folder, or on top of the folder, I put a sticky note that said, and this is the first time I ever used the word Mr. Thank You Project. But I said, dear passenger, you are invited to participate in the Mr. Thank You Project, where we send love, gratitude, and appreciation to people who are undervalued in their work. Inside this folder is a set of thank you cards for the pilots and flight attendants of our flight. Please make a note of you're welcome to write a note of appreciation or simply sign the cards. If you don't want to participate, that's fine. Whoever is just pass them to the person next to you. Whoever gets these in the last seat in the last row, return them to the woman in the red dress in seat 32C. That was actually my neighbor. She didn't know I put that, but I did because I wanted this to be completely anonymous. Like, I don't want to take any credit for this. So I go to the front of the plane. I give it to this elderly woman. I have to like yell the instructions at her because she's kind of hard of hearing. So I was like yelling the instructions, probably looked funny. And then I go back to my seat, and I immediately regret my decision, because I was like, okay, John, like, you've done some interesting stuff with gratitude, but I think you maybe crossed a line. You're asking complete strangers to say thank you to complete strangers. Like, someone's not going to be happy about this. They're going to hit their call button. They're going to be like, who did this? I'm not signing anything. And then they're going to find out it was me. And then when we land, TSA is there to arrest me, and I can never fly again. Right. That's all I can think about. This is a long, like 4.5-hour flight, and I can't get any work done because I'm just so focused, like, what's going to happen with these cards? What's going to happen with these cards? Then halfway through the flight, because I'm in the middle of the plane, the cards land on my tray table. I open them up, and it's insane. Like, there's messages and signatures from all these people on the plane. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, but we're going to run out of room. So I put some sticky notes inside and I said, hey, if we run out of room, write on these. I pass them on down. We're about to land. And so I go to check where the cards are, and they're in the second to last row. So I was like, okay, I'll get them right around landing. So we land, and I'm like waiting there for the cards to come, and people are getting off the plane, and the plane's almost completely empty, Joe, and nobody gives me the cards. So I start to get concerned. But then I see a man in the last seat in the last row, because I guess this flight was going to another destination. So he's sitting there in the last seat in the last row. And I ask him, I said, hey, sir, did you get the brown folder with all the thank you cards? And he says, oh, yeah. I gave that to the flight attendant. And I was like, man, I was kind of hoping to do that, but no worries. So I go to the flight attendant and I say, excuse me, did you get a brown folder from the guy in the last seat in the last row? And he says, nope. I said, no, he said he gave it to you when you were walking by. And the guy was like, oh, that's right. When I was picking up the trash, he gave me the folder, so I threw it away. Why? I was like, are you kidding? You threw it away? And he starts to get concerned. He's like, what was in the folder? And I said, that hand signed cards from everybody on the flight. And he's like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah, where are they? And he points to the trash truck that's about to drive away at the bottom of the stairs. And I said, we've got to get those cards. So he runs down the stairs, taps the trash guy on the shoulder. He has to get off, explain what's going on. They start taking off bags of trash from who knows what plane, by the way, ripping them open, rifling through. And I'm at the top of the stairs and I'm like, this is not happening right now. This is no way. And he finds a folder, but it's soaking wet. Water, wine, use your imagination. Oh my gosh. And he comes up the stairs and he hands it to me and he's like, I'm so sorry. And I open up the folder and the cards are in perfect condition. Not only are they in perfect condition, but like literally every square centimeter is signed by somebody on that plane. Like, Joe, outside of seeing my children born, it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And so I start handing out the cards to all the pilots and the flight attendants. And I get off the plane. And then a gentleman stops me and he says, hey, was that you? Are you the Mr. Thank You guy? So I didn't know if that was a good or a bad thing. I said, yeah, it was me. He says, that is one of the coolest things I've ever done on a plane. He's like, what you don't know is that my son was sitting next to me and he's having some trouble getting bullied at school. And when that folder landed on my tray table and I read what this was about, we got to have a conversation about friendship and about kindness and about how we love each other, regardless of sometimes how we treat each other. And that was a conversation that wasn't going to happen today. So thank you for starting that. And I think the lesson that I took from that, Joe, and I don't think I put this in the book because this is more of a recent revelation, but the unscalable things we do is exactly what allows us to scale. And what I mean by that is, I'm a business person. I still run our gifting company and I do a lot of speaking and coaching and training and all that. But what that means to me is that if we want to have an impact in the world, it doesn't just happen because we write a book and tell a bunch of people a great idea. It happens because we live that message every day of our lives. Because people sometimes believe your words, but they always believe your actions. And by showing up and doing that, it got to spread to everybody on that plane. And since sharing this story, I've heard of people who've started their own thank you projects, and one college student who was too broke to have money for Christmas presents. And he shared that he had written a letter to every member of his family telling them what he loves about them. And he said that was the greatest Christmas we've ever had because of the letters. There's a woman who was inspired by the book that she started her own stationery company, literally sells thank you cards now because she was inspired by it. And so everybody, I think, says, Joe, I think people want to change the world. So they think, I need to go out there and try to change things. But the real transformation occurs internally because you can't fake actions and you can't fake being real. And when you say you care about something and you live that out, people believe it and they choose to adopt it. And then they spread it, and then they spread it. And there's tens of thousands of people who started their own thank you projects because some dude in California felt a little ungrateful and decided he was going to live from his values for a year. And if I died tomorrow, Joe, I would feel so grateful for the impact my life has already been able to have, because it's going to keep happening regardless of what I do here moving forward. So that's probably the best story I can share about one of the greatest takeaways of the entire experience.
An impact of an experience multiplies. So, because many of us, we want to get the credit because we put our heart and soul into it. But what happens when you don't necessarily need the credit? It's amazing what happens. And there's many other stories, but for the lack of time, we only have a few minutes left. I want you to elaborate a little bit on some of the challenges that you have, a 30-day challenge, and you also have. Tell us a little bit about the Front Row Dads, because this is a men's organization that you're now a guest at. And what's that all about? The Front Row Dads community and the retreat you're on that you really thoroughly enjoyed. Sounds like an awesome experience.
Yeah. So two things. So the 30-day challenge. So from this, like, so people say, like, so what do you want me to do? And what I want you to do is to just try it out. You don't need to do what I did. 5 cards every day for a year, Joe, was insane. It was really hard. I don't think that's a realistic thing for most people, but that was part of the purpose. The purpose was to do something so hard that people would hear it and be like, I can't do that, but I could do one a day for like 30 days. So that's where the 30-day challenge came from. So if you go to mrthankyou.com, so mrthankyou.com/30, numbers 30, you can download a PDF of a 30-day challenge. So that's like what I want you to go do, is try that out and see what you experience out of it. Now,
that's on page 126. Page 126. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So the Front Row Dads is a community of entrepreneurial fathers who all run businesses and are dads. And so we have those things in common, because the common challenge you have as an entrepreneur and a father is you have two things that are pulling your attention. And one of them makes you money, which we all want, and one of them doesn't directly make you money. And so a lot of us can be in conflict, especially based on how we were raised, to value and go towards our business rather than supporting our family. So this group has one really simple message, one mission, which is it is for family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. And I think that sums up what they do.
Very good. I like that. Yes, very good. So you started what you called here a birth of a movement. So this is a snapshot, and you've got Nick's card. I really like that. You've inspired other people to take action on a positive direction. And page 112, I love this, assuming the best in people. Have you ever heard of the saying, catch someone do something wrong? How about catch someone doing something right?
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, if you have to simplify, like, what should you go do? Like, that's what it is. It's find the good. I have this concept of, we call it net beautiful. Net beautiful, I look at as like, at any given moment in the world, something bad's happening. Like, you zone in somewhere, like there's a wolf eating a kitten. there is a marriage ending in divorce. There's also a baby being born. There's also someone hitting a home run. There's someone having a magnificent moment. So at any given moment, there's always bad things and there's always good things. And the point is, if you want to feel better about your life, and positive psychology has proven this, the better we feel, the better we perform in our marriages, in our relationships, in our work, in our careers. And so by focusing on the good, regardless of what's going on, not being ignorant of it, we're not talking about toxic positivity, which means like ignoring all the bad, but in a healthy way, people who experience depression and anxiety, it's simply because they're focusing on what they're afraid is going to happen or the shame of what they've experienced. So I think, if there was a message for men out there who are like going through life challenges on a daily basis, I would say start with that. What's good happening right now? Well, yes, there's a lot. By the way, this was a big thing during COVID. I have a small group of salespeople that I coach and train. And one of the things that I had to work with them on is, what do I know to be true and what can I do today? Right. And I think that goes for even right now. If you're in a tough spot and things are very challenging for you, it's like, hey, what can I do? What can I do today? And then go out there and do that. What's good in my life now? And then what action can I take today? Like, I think that simplicity of focusing on what's good is a great starting point.
We definitely have no shortage of discussion, but we're already over time. We do have a question from one of the audience members. What message do you have for men out there who are going through some life challenges on a daily basis? And just briefly talk about what's next. And I love on page one, what page is 126, I think it was, where you had a letter to the reader. Just elaborate on those quickly. Yeah, 124 it was. Dear reader.
Yeah. So a message to, the men out there who are struggling or feeling a challenge on a daily basis. I think, well, number one, I love what you guys are about and getting men together to share about what's going on. I was at an event recently and it was a men's retreat, and we all shared, there's one question we answered, which is like, say something, like there's a circle, step into the circle and share something that you're ashamed of having done. And then you say anyone else, and then anyone else who's done or experienced that same shame will step into the circle. And it was remarkable that virtually everything somebody said that they felt shame about, someone else has been through it too. And just knowing we're not alone in our struggle made it bearable, made it something that we feel we didn't have to hide anymore. So I know that you guys do a lot of like group, I don't want to call it group therapy, but like we're getting groups together to share and talk about these things. I can't stress the importance of that enough, because a lot of times when we feel it's just us, we feel alone. And that is the worst thing to do when you're in a state of whether it be depression or anxiety. So that would be my encouragement. The final letter I wrote in the book was to the reader. And it was actually the last letter I wrote for the entire year. And it was just thanking the reader for reading the book and for allowing and for listening to my journey. And I think that as you're listening to this podcast or interview, however you're perceiving it on YouTube or virtually somewhere, I appreciate you going this far. We're 60 minutes, 61 or 2 minutes in. Like, you didn't have to be here. Right. And I think that's one of the greatest pieces about gratitude, Joe, is that gratitude is acknowledging the choices people make to show up. Because, Joe, you didn't have to be here today. You didn't have to show up and prepare. You didn't have to read my book, but you did. And the fact that you chose that, I can feel a significant amount of gratitude for just you spending the time, because you could have done it on Facebook, on YouTube. You didn't have to do anything. You could, and I think that's that alone allows us to always be able to find something to be grateful for in relationship. And I think that was a big piece, is that so much of gratitude and connection lives in relationship. So don't be alone. Don't hide, because when you get out there, you can get in a relationship, and there's a lot of healing that can occur.
Okay. I was looking for it on my notes. You talked about if you have an ulterior motive. I think I'd like to end with that. Interior motive for gratitude. I'm looking for it on my notes. Perhaps you can remember what I'm talking about. It if it's only based on selfish for being grateful, what's the consequence for that?
Well, I mean, the thing with gratitude and generosity, and this is especially when we run a gifting company, right? So we help people say thank you for a living, and the interesting thing with that is that we, one of the things that upsets people more than anything, one of our clients, is if they send a really nice expensive gift to somebody and that individual doesn't say anything, and And it's interesting because that is a big trigger for like ingratitude. Like, oh my gosh, I spent money on this gift, or I sent you a card. Or by the way, here's an interesting stat. I don't know if I share this in the book, but a great question for the audience is what percent, I sent out 1,800 thank you cards, right? What percent of people do you think even responded that they got one? 10%. So while out of sending 1,825 thank you cards, only 185 people said anything that they even got it. So that can feel really demoralizing, which is like, oh my gosh, does anyone even care? Does this matter? Right. And it can actually hold us back from expressing gratitude and love or being generous if we don't get something in return.
Mm-hmm.
But once you can become conscious that that's actually what's there causing you the pain, the action is simply to let it go of whatever might happen. And I think that's when things really started to explode for me in the whole project, Joe, was when I stopped hoping to hear anything back and just doing it out of the goodness of my heart and the true feeling of gratitude I had. That's where you remove the ulterior motives of gratitude and generosity, is when you just stop expecting to hear or see anything in return.
Yes, there's definitely been a lot of miracles that have happened in your life, and even other people that focus on genuine gratitude, not in a superficial manner, but a method of sincerely, deeply within their heart and soul, being grateful that God has endowed them with great things, and that good things come from even where they look like they're not that good. And it's amazing when we look at it with the right perspective. I'm very happy and grateful that we had a chance to have a conversation today. We're hoping to have you again. It's been a true delight. Please stay for a few minutes longer. And thank you for all the audience that are coming today. And please join in on some of our other events that we have, especially International Men's Day. And if you want to participate in Author Circle or some of our other events like peer-to-peer support group or other events. Thank you again for everyone joining today. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.